My D&D group has been playing in Icewind Dale, under the rime of the Frost Maiden, where everything is dark and cold and covered in ice. Our dungeon master asked me to build this, Grimskalle, a towering fortress of ice and bone, and well, I don't really know that much actually about it because that would be spoiling it, right? But I know that it has these 3 levels that I have to build. I know it roughly looks like this, and most importantly, I have 1 week to build it. Welcome back to Tabletop Forge. I was not sure I was going to be able to do this in 1 week, and I sat around, I was procrastinating, thinking I was going to tell him, nah man, I can't do this, this is crazy. But eventually I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I have to start tonight and I have to go hard. So I went outside, I slapped some foam together, and I started carving with my hot wire cutter into the mountainside. Having a 1 week deadline was pretty daunting, but I think the main reason I decided to take on this challenge was that this is the exact type of thing I want to make for this channel. I want to make stuff that is fun and interesting and challenging, but also something that I know we're going to use in our D&D campaign. I guess what I'm trying to say is, it is you, dear viewer, you are the reason I've taken on this challenge, so thanks for tuning in. Here I'm shaping this bottom layer of foam that's going to wrap around the cylindrical tower, and it's going to sit on top of that lower level, which is like the entry level dungeon. I'm taking some offcuts from the styrofoam and gluing them up against the tower to try to make it look like some snowdrifts have built up against the structure, and it will also help kind of blend the seams between these 2 different types of foam. One of my favorite things about making terrain is taking these very humble materials, sometimes even garbage materials, and crafting them into something awesome. Making the staircase was a little tricky. I started by taking this piece of foam, texturing up the sides, and slicing off the individual steps. Then I hot glued the first one down to the base, and then I hot glued the next one on top of that, and so on. I didn't follow the sketch that I had, which was pretty funny, but I did try to fit it in there best I could, and at some point I had to kind of break apart the stairs that I'd already glued to reshape them and get them kind of just right. There's definitely some trial and error there, but eventually I got it looking good, and I decided to test fit these towers, realized they were a little bit crooked, and I buffed them out off of camera. They're nice and straight now. To fill the area under the stairs, I just broke off some pieces of scrap foam, hot glued them in place, and tried to fill up that area so I could start building up this mountainside. Once I had a good amount of foam glued underneath the staircase, I mixed up some Sculptamold and I started filling in the rest of the gaps and kind of smoothing it out so that it looked like a nice big snow-covered mountain that this staircase was built into. I had a little Sculptamold left over, so I took it and filled in some gaps around the tower, around the mountain, smeared some on the base to build up a little bit of texture. This is the end of night 1. 1 night down. It's like 1 a.m. at this point. I'm feeling pretty accomplished. I'm feeling like, you know what? I think I can do this. Hopefully I can keep this energy up in the morning. First thing in the morning, I'm outside. I'm slicing up little squares on my hot wire table. I'm going to use these as the flooring for all the playable dungeons. Here I'm working on the roof. I just covered it with some white glue. And I'm going to take some of these square tiles and lay them down one by one, run them over at the edge a little bit, and when it dries, I'll go back with a sharp knife and trim off all the excess. From the pictures I was provided, I could see these kind of spiky structures jutting up from the top of the tower, and so I took some of these foam blocks, I carved out a basic little leaf shape, and then later I'll take a nice sharp blade and trim it down and shape it into a jagged, icy, spiky structure that will be glued across the top. You might notice these Halloween skull masks in the background. That's actually what I used to create the skull on the tower. I took a mask, I clipped off its lower jaw, spray painted it black, and sort of carved it and set it into the tower walls. I'm really happy with the way it looks and fits, and later I'll add some texture and blend it into the rest of the tower. Here's the final shape of one of those spiky bits that go along the top, and now it's ready to be glued into place. I glued the rest of the top. I carved in a recess for this mask to fit into, and I glued the mask to the bottom layer but not the top so that it can be removable. It'll be playable on the very top, that middle layer, and of course the entry level that you walk into right under the tower itself. Now it's time to carve in some bricks. I don't want these to look like stone bricks. I believe this tower is supposed to be made of like big ice blocks. So I'm going to carve some irregular shapes, make them a little bit bigger than a normal brick. And hopefully that and some paint will help to create the illusion that these are big blocks of ice. I did try one other thing to try to get away from the stone brick look, and that was to take a lighter and melt the foam just a tiny bit all over the piece, so that it would kind of create a more organic shape, a little bit kind of a glossier finish perhaps, and hopefully make it look more like ice. I glued some sand down as a basic texture, and then I took some navy blue paint, mixed it with Mod Podge, and covered everything with that bluey, gooey mix. Once that was dry, I started cutting out the different shapes for the interchangeable dungeons. I decided to do it out of MDF using a scroll saw so they'd be nice and durable. You could use foam or anything you want, but the idea was I couldn't build the dungeon inside of it, or at least it'd be too hard, so I wanted to be able to remove it and kind of swap the dungeon out. The other thing I did off camera was cover the mask in some tile grout. This gave it a little bit of texture and made it not look so plastic and smooth. The next color to go down was gray, which I applied pretty heavily, covering up a good chunk of the blue but still leaving some behind as a shadow. Then I applied a dry brushing of teal, which did a good job to kind of sell the icy effect. And finally a dry brushing of an off-white, which brought the piece to a whole new snowy, icy, frosty look. Once the painting is done, it's time to apply some snow effects. I start by putting some white glue in the places where I want the snow to stick, and then I take this Woodland Scenic snow and I sprinkle it on the glue. It's pretty straightforward, but somehow I applied way too much snow on this top level and had to go back and brush some off so that you could still see the tiles underneath. I repeat this same process over the entire build, adding some snow effects, and once that first layer is down, to make sure it sticks, I spray it all with some isopropyl alcohol, which will help the glue really sink into all the snow, and then I kind of just drizzle on some white glue mixed with water over the entire piece. I usually do at least one more coating of this with snow and glue and isopropyl alcohol, just to make sure everything looks nice and smooth and natural. Another great way to sell the snowy, icy effect is with icicles. Just squeeze out some hot glue on a non-stick surface like a glass table or some wax paper, and then while the nozzle is still hot, scratch it along the surface so that it doesn't look so smooth and plasticky and fake. Making these icicles can be a little bit time consuming and tedious, but honestly, you can never have too many icicles. If you think you've made enough, you're wrong. Make some more, put them everywhere. It's a really effective way to make the piece look nice and frosty. To attach the icicles, I just squirt a little bit of hot glue on the tip, push it into place where I want it, make sure it's nice and straight, and then again I use the hot nozzle of the hot glue gun to sort of blend the top of it onto whatever it's attached to. I place several icicles on the skull as well as along the spikes at the top of the tower. We are in the final phase of this build. I've completed the outside, I just need to build these inner dungeons. I'm not sure exactly what day it is at this point, but I know game day is coming soon, but we're gonna make it on time. Here I'd like to showcase some of my brilliant editing skills.
Nice!
I start sizing up some walls that I want to build on the inside. I think this is about 2.5 inches tall, which I think is usually pretty good. It's a good scale and it's pretty playable. And then I start carving in some ice blocks, just like I did on the outside of the tower. To help give the walls some strength and rigidity, I carved out some of these icy pillars that would kind of act like posts that the walls would tie into. And then I textured the surface with some aluminum foil and a rock, and I started gluing in the walls. Whenever I'm making a doorway or an arch or whatever, I like to take a piece of paper, fold it over, and then kind of trim it from there. That way, when you unfold it, it's perfectly symmetrical. I'm just trying to space out the gaps between these little pillars here so that I can make some foam archways that will fit in these little gaps. I find that making terrain for D&D is a balance between how cool it looks, how real it looks, how playable it is, and then often, you know, how easy it is to actually pull off. In this project, I wasn't really sure how I was going to tackle these dungeons and the terrain itself. I didn't want to just completely move the terrain to the side and pull the dungeons out, so I came up with this idea to sort of fit the dungeons onto the terrain, you know, when I remove different parts of it. I've made a lot of terrain, but somehow this is the first time I've done something like this, so let me know what you think. In my final step before painting, I use some spackling or filler, and I blend the walls into the grounds a little bit better. And then I do the same painting as the outside, a dark navy blue with Mod Podge, a gray dry brush, a teal dry brush, and a white dry brush. Overall, this is a very simple paint job, but I'm very happy with the look it gave. I think it really gives a pretty good icy, snowy look. And again, very simple, right? 4 colors, 3 of them were dry brushing. Awesome. With about a day to spare, I finished this build. We had an epic D&D session. Maybe I'll tell you about that later. But for now, I think it's time to see the final product. Hope you enjoy. We did it! Video 2 is done. Giant Skeletor Castle is done. Hopefully you guys like this. Thank you so much for watching. We've got more videos coming soon. Show me some love in the comments. and I'll catch you guys next time on Tabletop Forge.